All right, so we just got back from the track. My kid rode tonight. I did not. Tomorrow, the motor's coming out of that, hitting the top end. And at 71 hours, the packing is finally smoked in that silencer. So we're gonna repack the exhaust or the silencer and do a top end. And I pulled a wedge. The nut on the swing arm bolt decided it needed to go away. But for tonight, I got home and I had some parts from Rocky Mountain. My wife's PW80 that she just cruises around the neighborhood. Since we got it, it was in a barn. It sat for a while. Cleaned it up. It's a pretty nice bike. However, it leaks fuel. So we always shut the Petcock off and let it run out before we bring it back in the garage. A couple days later, it'll have a puddle under it. I think the float stick's open, or the seat's bad in the needle, and I believe the Petcock is bad as well. So I got, from Rocky Mountain, I got the All Balls carb rebuild kit. There's a part number if you're curious. And the Tusk Petcock rebuild kit. Again, there's a part number. So we're gonna throw those in and see if we can make it quit leaving puddles on the ground. Okay, so pulled the fuel tank and the seat, 2 bolts on the tank and a strap on the rear, 2 bolts under the seat. Gives me plenty of access to that carburetor. So I'm gonna start with the carburetor rebuild kit. Of course, the fuel tank's full, why wouldn't it be when I have to pull the Petcock off? So I'm gonna go out and drain it back into a gas can here in a minute, but right now we're gonna start on the carb. So as far as pulling the carb, I just pulled the intake boot off. It's just Phillips screws on the clamps on each side. Then I loosened the one that goes to the intake, the screw, which is just a pinch bolt, so that I could pull the throttle assembly and choke assembly out of the top so we can just leave it on the bike. The other thing, since this thing's stock and still has the oil injection, you have that oil injection hose that comes out of the pump with that goofy squeeze clamp on there. I just use a flathead and kind of wiggle it off the nipple so that you can get it off and leave it alone, so you don't pull it out of the pump side, so you don't have to pull the cover off and get in it. Now remember, the Petcock was turned off. There's fuel dumping out of the carb, so the Petcock definitely needs rebuilt, and the carb also definitely needs rebuilt. All right, so this kit comes with everything: needle and seat, high and low jet, your air fuel screw with the spring, needle and clip for the throttle, all your bowl screws, your screws for the top of the throttle assembly, plus the gasket for that, bowl gasket. Here's a gasket for your needle seat. It has everything in it, which is really nice. I will change the jets. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but pulling out this main jet holder, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. It's just covered in goo. I just had this carburetor apart last summer when we picked it up, but I'm guessing it gained some more crap since then, or it's working it out of the fuel tank, one or the other, which probably isn't gonna help our needle seat situation, but we're gonna see. So I'm going to reuse the bowl screws. You notice they have a lock washer on them that will not come down over the threads. The new ones that came in the kit do not. I'm sure I could fight the lock washer off, but there's nothing wrong with the head of these screws. They're not internal carburetor parts that are worn out or gross, so we're just going to reuse them. All right, so the carb's rebuilt, all put back together, ready to go back on. We're gonna put it back on, and I'm gonna flip that tank up on a gas can, drain it out, and pull the petcock off. While I'm in here though, before I forget, since I have the seat off, even though that injection oil is pretty full, I am gonna top that off real quick. All right, so I flipped the gas can up, drained it back into that, or the gas tank, drained it back into the gas can. 2 Phillips head screws obviously pulls that petcock off. All right, so after making a massive mess on the garage floor, I got the petcock off the tank. We're gonna put the rebuild kit in it real quick. How is it still leaking gas? That's mind blowing. 2 little screws gotta come off the front. So the Tusk kit comes with the internal rubber piece that sends fuel from reserve and your main line, which that little filter is pretty clogged, so I have to clean that up. The O-ring that goes between on the back side of this knob and the gasket from the tank to the base of the petcock. It also comes with bolts, but I'm gonna leave, again, the external ones are fine, I'm gonna leave them alone. And I think the key there is, you can tell these gaskets on the back side of the screws, those need to be there as well when you put this back together. So I'm just gonna leave that alone, leave well enough alone. I'm gonna spray some carb clean on this filter and get that gasket out of there. All right, so the petcock's rebuilt. I did use the new screws on that, the little screws, just because they were partially rounded, like somebody touched them before. Petcock's rebuilt, carburetor's rebuilt. Going back together. All right, so carburetor's back on, fuel tank's back on. I'm gonna wait to put the seat on until we start it, make sure everything's okay. So far, dry, no leaks, However, petcock's off. So I'll turn it down to on. Let it sit there for a minute, see if it's gonna overflow. It is midnight, I probably shouldn't start this, but I'm going to. So far, no leaks. Gotta set that idle up some. Do a couple cranks before I even start it again. All right, so pretty quick and easy. I have well under an hour in rebuilding the carb and the Petcock. Couple quick turns of a screwdriver and it's already tuned pretty darn close as I can get it at midnight without revving it out and riding it around the yard. But so far, I didn't shut the fuel off before I let it run out, so there still should be fuel in the carburetor and the Petcock. At this point, before I rebuild it, it would be making a puddle where all this dirt's falling off it. I rode this thing in a slow race on Monday night at TNT Sports MX, and it was a mud fest. I washed it once, but it probably needs washed again. But yeah, no more leaks, so that's great. I'm gonna let it on overnight, because in theory, I should be able to let this fuel on, and that carburetor should not push any fuel out onto the ground. So I'm gonna let it on overnight. The whole reason I'm even doing this, not that it really matters, the spike's just for play, but I'm getting ready to paint the floor in the garage. And the last thing I need is fuel. Even though, you know, the epoxies for the garage floors are supposed to be fuel and oil resistant, I'm not taking any chances. And it is kind of nice to not have to worry about killing this thing and shutting the fuel off and letting it run out. So, and with all the goo in that carburetor and that needle seat not seating well enough, obviously I'm not getting great performance either. And on a bike that maybe makes 6 horsepower, I could use all the performance we can get. All right, here we are the next day. There's the overflow from the carb. No fuel under it. No fuel coming out of it. Fuel's still on. Fuel's in the bowl of the carb. So I'd say we fixed it.